Welcome, Jenna Moniz from Heart Math Institute. It's a pleasure to have you here with Empowering Educators Summit and have you bring the skills and talents not only as an educator, but as an education specialist through the work of Heart Math Institute. I feel so eager to hear your wealth of information that you have to share, very important information in the idea of transforming learning environments. And I welcome you to tell us about who you are and what you're up to.
Jill, thank you so very much for the warm welcome and invitation to be a part of this transformative and very important seminar of yours. We so appreciate the work out in the field of educators like yourself who are helping us to take education to another level. I am so pleased to be here speaking with you all on behalf of the Heart Math Institute. I am a longtime educator, 30 years or so, and have started off teaching secondary, post-secondary, work in administration, work in curriculum development. And then my most recent project prior to coming to the Heart Math Institute was actually creating a small school, a micro school. And this school is located in Broward County, for those of you who may remember at this point, 2018. And unfortunately, these incidences have become so frequent that we've almost lost track of these mass tragedies. But if you'll remember, 2018, February 14th was our tragedy in Broward County, Parkland to be specific, which was the Stoneman Douglas shooting. That was our community. And as a result, many of the students weren't physically, emotionally, mentally able to return to the school building. Partly as a result of that, and in part the work that I was doing with Broward County in terms of our social emotional learning and mindfulness, we created a small academy for teenagers. And the academy is 100% cell-oriented. And I learned about the Heart Math Institute and some of the techniques, and especially about the science and research that backs its work. And having come from a background, my graduate studies are in brain-based instruction, right? So while the education world was pushing me to do ed leadership, you should study ed leadership so you can become a director of this and run this, I said, I think I want to study more about teaching and learning. What is the optimal environment for learning? What is the optimal place for students to actually learn? And so I pursued a master's degree in brain-based instruction. And what I thought at that point, I think what a lot of people think who study cognitive science, the science of thinking, is that the brain is the final frontier, that the brain is the manager of the body, and it's the, you know, the place of creativity and commands to the body, etc. And in many ways it is. But what we didn't know, what I didn't know at the time, is that most of what the brain commands to the rest of the body comes from the heart. And so as I happened upon the research and the techniques of the Heart Math Institute, I literally could not get enough. And I started incorporating the techniques into my own school academy with my own students and with myself. Needless to say, life-changing for me, life-changing for my own students. And not even a few years later, I was invited to work with the Heart Math Institute, and I just couldn't turn down the opportunity because of how important this work is and my desire to spread the techniques, the research into a much wider platform. We work globally, we work internationally with health fields, first responders, with the military, with athletes, professional athletes, Olympic level athletes. Because of what we know about heart rate variability, which we'll talk about shortly, But education was and is still the newest field to really be wrapped under the umbrella of the HeartMath Institute. And that is because of all of the increased levels and almost mainstream levels of stress and anxiety and trauma, if you will, that we are dealing with globally. And so our techniques, our technology, our research is tried and true. The HeartMath Institute has been functioning since 1991 out of Northern California and really researching the intelligence of the heart. And I'll pause there just to see if you have any questions, but there are a couple of slides that I'd really like to show you so you actually can get a visual of the communication between the heart and the brain. What I didn't know.
And we'd very much like to see those visuals. Visuals help us to understand so much better.
And what I didn't know at the point, Jill, when I was, pursuing my master's degree in brain-based instruction and cognitive science, is that the heart sends far more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart.
Isn't that a mind-boggling statement? I mean, that's just what?
Well, in fact, 80 to 90% of the communication that happens between the brain and the heart actually stems from the heart in the form of afferent or ascending waves. So as we know, the autonomic nervous system is the communication between the brain and the heart. But what's not commonly known is that the majority of the information being sent between the heart and the brain come from, originate from the heart. So in essence, in a nutshell, the information and the commands, the demands, the information that's being sent from the brain, from the mind to the rest of the body truly is only as good as the information that the heart is sending it, if that makes sense.
Very much so. Wow. Yes, please show us the visuals and help us to see this concept. It's been mentioned in other interviews as well, and it's interesting to see how the awareness is truly growing of this work.
Well, we certainly hope so. And the work of the HeartMath Institute, I won't say tagline, but the work of the HeartMath Institute is to awaken the heart of humanity across the globe. And, very much in line with the work that you're doing in terms of our desires to transform education, to transform the way that we show up in the world so that we are living in a world that we want to live in.
Consciously evolving ourselves.
That's right. And so I'm not sure if you're able to see my slides here.
Very clearly, yes.
So
we also see your next slide. Let's pause one moment.
Thanks so much. So again, the work of the HeartMath Institute is to help share and spread information that is all research-based, all empirical, about the intelligence of the heart and the communication between the heart and the brain, which is, again, our autonomic nervous system, for the purposes of our own well-being, our relationships with others within our community, and of course, globally. So we measure what we call coherence of the heart. And if you think about the term coherence, what that should imply means that you can hear clearly the communication. And so what we're referring to here is the communication, in this instance, if it's personal coherence between the brain and the heart. Social coherence would be that communication among us, between our friends, our communities, our family members, our classrooms, teachers and students, teams working together. And then, of course, the global scale, which we also happen to measure. We'll talk a little bit about that shortly. And as I mentioned, all of our work is empirical and research-based. We invite you to visit our website, heartmath.org, to see more about our tons of research, our peer-reviewed studies, our white papers, etc., that really back up the research that the HeartMath Institute has conducted over the last 3 decades as it relates to heart rate variability. And so heart rate variability is different from your heart rate. This is not how many times your heart beats per minute. This is more the pattern of your heartbeat. So if you can see here, and this is a typical heart rate, there's the space, the time between each heartbeat varies. It's not the same. So while it used to be commonly thought that a very consistent metronome type of beat is healthy, what we know now is that it's not. In fact, we want our heartbeats to have adaptability, to have variability. The more adaptability or variability within the heartbeat, the more capacity that we have, the more resilience, if you will, the more capacity we have to deal with the stressors of life. And so this slide just basically says we're energy systems. And what we measure is our energy, because we know that, again, 80 to 90% of the communication between the brain and the heart is coming from the heart. So you are basically
90%.
energizing your thoughts.
I'm sorry, I interrupted. Say that part again.
No, that's okay. The quality of your heartbeat, the quality of the patterns coming from your heart have so much to do with how clearly we can think, how we perform in the world, how we show up in the world. If you think about it, and this slide just basically shows we're energy systems. If you think about it, it's really difficult to figure out a complicated math problem, or a problem that you're dealing with, or a situation, communication in a relationship, if you're not feeling well. So the research of the HeartMath Institute is around these energetic systems, the patterns of these energetic systems, specifically of the heart. And the heart powers the rest of the body, is the bottom line. The energy, the amount of energy that we have is based on the power that's coming from the heart, if you will. And we know that the energy within the heart and how charged it is has to do with our emotional states and the quality of our emotional states, the quality literally of the emotions that we're feeling and emitting. So when we talk about resilience and the capacity to deal with stress of the world, we talk about resilience in 4 domains: physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And just to make this really simple, what we know through our research is that the emotional domain, because all of these frameworks work together, these systems work together and intertwine. We know that it's difficult to function if we don't get a good night's sleep, for example. That would lie in the physical domain. But what we know is that the emotional domain is almost, if you will, the supercharger of the rest. Our emotional states have so much to do with how well we can function, how much resilience we have, how well we perform in the world. So remember, I mentioned that we work with first responders. We work with the military. We work with professional athletes. The reason that we do this is because we're building resilience with our clients to deal with in the midst of stressful situations, to be able to think clearly, make clear decisions, be accurate, be precise, and perform at their optimal place. So if you're thinking about a student, if you're thinking about within a school, if your emotional state, and this brings me back, right, to my graduate studies, and we would talk a lot about the importance of the affective domain and making sure that the emotional state within, the students feel supported and everyone feels safe to learn. And right now we know that we're dealing with everything from on the heels of a global pandemic. So we're literally afraid of the air that we breathe. Let alone the types of tragedies that my students and my community live through with the Stoneman Douglas shooting. That is almost a weekly event in this country.
Wow.
So what we're looking at here is literally the heart patterns of someone who is feeling If you look on the left side of the screen, what we call incoherent waves. Incoherent emotions are emotions of anxiety, worry, frustration, anger, rage, etc. That is the quality of the beat that your heart will produce. And so if you think about that term coherence, it's almost like a staticky signal through a radio wave. The communication becomes blocked because literally the pattern, the quality of the heartbeat is staticky, it's fractured, it's fragmented, it's chaotic, if you will. As opposed to on the right-hand side, where that beat becomes a nice, smooth, sine-like wave that doctors look for, a nice coherent wave. It's much easier to send communication from the heart to the brain and the reverse through waves that are coherent, through a heartbeat that is coherent. And that is generated through emotions that we call renewing emotions or coherent emotions. And those include appreciation, ease, comfort, joy, creativity. And not just the relaxing, restful, calming emotions. Again, we work with the military. We work with athletes. So the idea of being in a coherent state isn't necessarily dependent upon being in a relaxed state. You can be on the move. Your sympathetic nervous system can be up and going because you've got to move your body, you've got to run, you've got to act, and still be in a coherent state. This is actually the same person's heart rate before and after doing one of our techniques, heart-focused breathing. So initially, you see a state of incoherence, and that is the communication between the heart and the brain. Again, mostly from the heart to the brain. That's what the heartbeat looks like. And after doing a technique that we call heart-focused breathing, the heart then moves into a state of coherence. This is literally the same person within minutes.
That is so powerful to see that difference and to see those words, right? And understand those emotions and know how they feel within, but to see the science backing this up.
And this is what we measure. Again, HRV or heart rate variability has to do with the pattern or the quality of the resonant frequency, if you will. These are frequencies of your heartbeat. So again, just to give you an idea of what that shift can look like from frustration to appreciation.
And understanding the feelings that shift makes.
Well, that's just it. If we're not aware, and we know that most times we're not even aware of what it is that we're feeling because it becomes our normal state. So if we are used to getting up and going to a place of work, let's say as an example, and we're used to the same emotions being triggered every time that I know this person is going to set this up, or I know I'm going to have to walk into this meeting, or I'm going to have to deal with, whether it be staff or students that will, and I'm pausing because we're careful with our language here, but could trigger this emotional state that is not optimal. There comes a point where we realize no matter what's happening outside of us, no matter what's going on in the world, no matter what kind of information I'm being sent, when I turn on the TV, when I walk into that workplace, when I walk into that space that I think is what makes me feel a certain way, the shift here is realizing, and this is the awareness, that our emotions can and should be generated from within. And that's where the awareness and attention and focus on what you're feeling. And what we teach to students is, first and foremost, you have to be aware of what you're feeling. Most times we're not even aware that we're feeling frustration. It just is our normal state. We're not aware that we're judging. It's just our normal state. We're not aware that we're feeling slightly anxious. It just is our normal state. So the first step, of course, is becoming aware of what it is that we're feeling, aware of the quality of the emotions that we are feeling and emitting. And that's what our technology, that's what our techniques help us first and foremost to become aware of, because you can only make a change and a shift once, if you're aware of it. Most of the time, we're not even paying attention to it.
Wow.
But if we do pay attention, what we see and what we can measure, as demonstrated in this slide, is that emotional quality, if it becomes your habitual state and becomes almost your baseline of what you typically feel throughout a normal day, that becomes the quality of your energetic field. And this is personal coherence that we're talking about. We all have an energetic field that surrounds us and emanates mostly from our heart. So as you see here, that field, and it's interesting because going back to the communication between the brain and the heart, we can measure the electromagnetic field outside of the brain about 1 inch. However, outside of the heart, we can measure that field 3 feet, 4 feet, and beyond. So it's a much stronger magnetic field that generates from the heart than the brain, which goes back to that 80 to 90% coming from the heart. But we can measure this outside of our bodies. And so what this means is what you're feeling, the emotions, the resonant frequency and quality of the emotions that you're feeling don't just stay inside of your own body. We can measure them outside of your body and they impact the people around you.
That is so profound. So profound.
And so what we know and what we're continuing to study and research through our personal coherence and our work in social coherence and global coherence is that we can't deny our interconnectivity. We are all connected. And no matter where we are positioned on the globe, collectively, collaterally, what we put out, one of the things that we'll say at the HeartMath Institute and our director of research, Dr. Roland McCready, who really is the second to our founder, Doc Childry. Dr. Roland McCready is our director of research, and really much of this work is owed to him and his research team. And one of the things that he will often say and remind us daily is, we just have to think about what we're feeding the field. What are you feeding the field right now? What are you feeding the field today? What are you feeding the field in this moment? We know that emotions move, right? Emotions don't stay the same. Emotions are energy in motion, and they can change within the day. They can change within the hour. They can change within moments. And if we're aware of what it is that we're feeling, and if we know the science behind how powerful our thoughts and our emotions are in terms of how we impact not only ourselves, but others, no matter where we're positioned on the globe, then there's a sense of responsibility there. Well, what am I feeding the field? Because what we now know is that collectively, this all adds up. And so we have what are called magnetometers positioned across the globe. Our goal is to have 12. And they are, again, please visit our website, heartmath.org. Global Coherence Initiative. Our Global Coherence Initiative does the study around measuring collectively across the globe how our coherence or lack thereof, the quality of the emotions that we are emitting across the globe, we're measuring how they impact our geomagnetic field. And whether or not, right, our hypothesis is that we can modulate the magnetic fields outside of the Earth based on our collective coherence. If you take a look here, this is a real photo. This is a photo taken by NASA. And any guess what that little dot is in the middle of the screen?
I would say that's our Earth.
That is our beloved Earth, right?
Mm.
And if you zoom out, you can clearly see that there, remember that slide that we showed about the energetic fields around your individual person and how they interact with others around us? Well, it gets bigger than that. Globally, collectively, collaterally, we have fields that surround our Earth. And so our hypothesis at the HeartMath Institute is that we can modulate these fields. If you look at the fields that surround the Earth, you can almost see that they are vibrating. And they do, they vibrate, they're frequencies, the same types of frequencies that we saw personally. And what actually modulates or makes those fields move are a combination of, and maybe a walk back into our science lessons of high school and secondary school of Schumann resonance and solar winds, but we also impact those fields. So our research is behind how our collective interconnectivity and the quality of our heart rate variability, the frequencies that we are putting out, what we're feeding the field, how they collectively impact the Earth. And so when we zoom back in and think about where we are, and in the education field, if you are a teacher, an educator, a parent, a child, a sibling, I think it's hard not to look at the way that we show up in the world differently. To me, it's hard to deny how important our thoughts and our emotions are individually, how we interact with one another socially, how we show up in our communities, because our emotions have quality, measurable quality that we know actually turn into something, they matter. They become something. And we modulate the fields that surround our Earth collectively.
That's so powerful.
And so I'll stop the slides there just so we can kind of unpack some of that. And as it relates really to, well, how does this impact us as educators?
Jenna, I just want to take a moment to validate that every time I've talked to you, and even in your presentation, there is a quality that comes through that does affect me, even through the video or the phone, because it's a spaciousness that you step into. It's not always a doing or a needing to say, it's being present to, and it opens up this quality of authentic connection. And I really want to just validate the felt sense that comes even just in relating to your energy field in that way. And I also would love to remind you to please share that picture behind you, because that's a powerful one as well. So please do continue.
I certainly will. Thank you, Jill. And I appreciate that sentiment on your part. It's real. That connectivity, we know that your telephone, for example, works, and the waves, the communication, work across states, work across countries, work across. None of this is local in the sense that you can't feel it even non-locally. And to your point, essentially what we're measuring here when we're talking about heart rate variability and coherence, right? So this is a coherent communication between the heart and the brain. This signifies a heart that a person who is feeling renewing, regenerative emotions such as appreciation, care, etc. Versus this side, that we call cortical inhibition because it's hard to think clearly. Why is it hard to think clearly when we're feeling feelings of frustration, anger, worry, anxiety? Because that's the quality of the heartbeat. That's the quality of the communication between the heart and the brain. It is incoherent. The brain can't hear the heart as well as the brain can hear the heart hear. And so to your point, often what we see with folks that we work with is there is a disconnect between the thoughts and the heart. We feel a certain way because we've had a certain thought, and they end up becoming patterns. If I wake up and I think, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, I've got to do this, it's going to set off a pattern of emotions. Our emotions are generated by our thought patterns. And so this is about being aware of how our thoughts are impacting our emotions, because the mind is feeding the heart is feeding the brain and the rest of the body. If you're aware that you're waking up and automatically you're turning on that stress response, well, that's your opportunity point to do something different. But again, that awareness is important. So what I think that you're feeling and sensing and hearing is, someone who has put a lot of time and effort into the awareness, first and foremost, of being aware of what I'm thinking and how it then impacts how I'm feeling. And so if there is a disalignment, a discord, and what you're feeling is different from what you're thinking, or what you're thinking is different from what you're feeling, then you're right, it's not authentic. And so in a lot of ways, this is about authenticity and being able to think and feel in a way that is connected, your heart's qualities, being able to be true to yourself.
And in the spaciousness that you allow in that awareness, then you're choosing your words so conscientiously. And I just think that that's an important part of the puzzle here, right?
Well, thank you, Jill. And what we didn't talk about, and we'll probably not get too far into, but what we also research and study, because when you study the intelligence of the heart, you learn that, well, here's a question for you, right? And I ask my students this all of the time. If a person, God forbid, has some kind of tragic accident where they are no longer, that the brain no longer works, can you keep the body alive? Yes, and everybody goes, yes, you can keep the body alive. But how about the heart? If, God forbid, you were in a tragic accident, if the heart stops working, are you still alive?
No.
You need a transplant, right? Well, and then they start asking, well, I've heard stories about, I've had a cousin who, I know someone who got a heart transplant and has memories of the person before they received, of the person who they've received the heart transplant from. We'll pick up some of the habits, some of the taste buds, their taste buds can change. So then you start, well, what is that? And then, you ask yourself, well, are we our bodies? Are we our minds? Or are we more than that? And so we teach practical intuition as well, because we know that our personal coherence and communication here is also connected to our social coherence. So our communication among people, and not just people, by the way. We have studies with animals, with horses, with dogs, with trees. We are so excited about our new research, tree rhythms. And this is measuring the magnetic fields of trees and their ability to communicate, their communication, and whether or not we impact trees and trees impact us. Well, we know that they do. So we're studying how that communication and interconnectivity actually happens. And we know that there's something much larger. And we call this, right, the global field that feeds into a global field. Well, what is the global field? That's yours to define. But when you are communicating, when your personal coherence is intact and aligned, I mean, if you think about, because this is frequency and waves, it opens up your communication channels to where you're able to perceive more, right? We know that humans perceive what? Under 1% of actually what's out there. Our perception is very small. It opens up perception to far more information than we had access to before. And it's not that this is, woo-woo or weird stuff. This is all measurable and scientific and based in physics and, a lot of the stuff that Albert Einstein studied. Some of this he was a little bit uncomfortable with because he didn't understand, he was able to measure and figure out, oh my goodness, right? Completely transformative science. But what was connecting us? What was that connection that we couldn't at that point measure, that we are now able to measure? Answers a lot of the questions about our connection to something greater. And so intuition is something that we teach practically, and that comes from the heart. That comes from the communication between not only your heart and your mind, but something much larger, a global field. And so you get answers to, you get more information if you're open to receive more information and you are paying attention. And so we teach a technique called, and this is fast forwarding a bit, but as we talk about intuition, we teach a technique called freeze frame. This is one of our most popular techniques. It's one of the first ones, actually, one of the earliest heart math techniques. And this would be if you're ever in a situation, which we are all the time, where you want to solve an issue or you want greater access to bigger answers to develop a project, or you have a problem that you just don't have the answers to, and you're looking for greater answers. Our technique called freeze frame, again, this is all research-based, starts with heart-focused breathing. All of our techniques start with heart-focused breathing, which is not to be confused with meditation. This is where we place our attention. So this has to do with consciousness, if you will. Being aware and putting your attention and your focus on your heart, because then you're aware of what you're feeling. And almost like I tell my students, almost like a music conductor, because this is about your heart's rhythms, almost like a music conductor. You're able to modify the frequency, the stations, the music of your heart, if you will. Now, that's my own analogy. That's not the language that we use at the Heart Math Institute. But heart-focused breathing starts with putting your attention on the area of your chest or your heart, because that's where then you can make changes. Anywhere you put your attention or your focus is where you put your power. So by putting your attention or your focus on the area of your heart, you are now able to shift it. Yes, through your attention and your focus. You are giving it literally your power, measurable power. And from there, back to freeze frame, we would then, get ourselves in our techniques, and I'm happy to share the techniques further with anyone who would like to, to further discuss. But the freeze frame technique involves asking for greater, asking for greater intelligence to drop in. Is there a solution that I'm not thinking of here? Is there a way that we could come to an agreement here that neither one of us is thinking of at this point? Is there a better idea than the one that my mind has come up with at this point? And letting that sit and allowing space and room for greater intelligence to drop in, if you will. And it is a rare case that any of the folks that we work with who are intentionally and really putting their focus and attention on the technique, it is a rare case that we hear someone say, well, that didn't work. Most often we hear responses like, well, I never thought that could have been a solution. Well, this just came to me. Well, how about we try this a different way? And what's really interesting is when folks who are working on, working through, working out a situation together, when they come up with a similar solution that neither one of them had had before. And that's when you really start understanding our interconnectivity. Whether or not we're aware of it, we're impacting one another, we're affecting one another.
It really is all energy, isn't it?
It really is all energy.
Back
Somebody said that. Who was that guy that said everything is energy and it never dies, right? It just transforms. And so this is the work of transforming energy. And unfortunately, we're at a place societally, globally, where the energy is often of fear. The shared energy, right? It doesn't take much to get into a state of worry. Turn on the news. You listen to what's going on. So there just seems to be this element of fear-based emotions. Again, you look at the polarity and decisions being made. You look at, what we're facing with these mass, tragedies. And it's really, if you're not paying attention, really easy to get stuck into a place of fear. And so it's almost working against the current to transform that energy from fear, frustration, judgment, anger, worry, anxiety, etc. It takes attention. And so when I say you're hearing a person that's put a lot of work, you're hearing a person that's put attention, because these are tools that we all have access to if we're aware and if we pay attention and if we put genuine effort into wanting to shift our baseline. And that's what we call it, because your baseline in the language of the Heart Math Institute is almost like your norm. Well, what's your norm? What's your normal state? What is the state that you are typically in? A lot of that has to do with the mood that you're typically in, which becomes your personality oftentimes. And so how do you become aware of, to be empowered to shift that baseline from one of incoherence into a new baseline to where your normal state is one of coherence? And that's the work that we do, is helping specifically, in my case, working with educators, working with students. This is very close and dear to my heart, to shift their personal baselines. And so while our techniques are very simple, right? Heart-focused breathing is putting your attention on the area of your heart, being aware of what you're feeling, breathing in a little slower and deeper than usual. This is not meditation. You can do this walking. You can do this playing baseball. You can do this. I tell my students, you can do this. You should do this when you're walking into a cafeteria, if that's what makes you nervous, when you're walking onto the bus, when you're getting off of the bus, when you're about to take a test in school, with our educators, if they're going into that meeting, if they're going into that classroom, especially in those high stress times, but also in our normal day. So it becomes a routine that you're almost modulating your, like I'll tell my students, you're the DJ of your music. You're playing the music. You're tuning your heart into the music that you want to feel. And so it's just being aware, making adjustments, being aware, making adjustments, being aware, making adjustments to this shifts your baseline until it becomes your new normal state. And the goal, the hope is that the students that I work with, the educators that I work with, get to a point where that state and that place of high stress no longer feels normal. And so life happens, and it's going to happen to all of us, and we're going to get stressed out, and we're going to get worried, and things are going to happen. But being aware that, I'm feeling that feeling because of that thing that happened outside of me. My emotions are controlled, not outside of me, but inside of me. And getting yourself back into that state takes consistency, takes practice. For the athletes, it's easy for them to understand because they're used to practicing techniques to the point where, I'll say to a student, if you're a basketball player and you're shooting a free throw, You practice it so much, your brain doesn't even have to think about the form anymore. It just automatically goes into the motion. Well, this is the same kind of idea. It's almost training your energetic system. It is training your energetic system to get to a new baseline, to where your new normal state is one of coherence. Because what we know is that it impacts the way that we show up, how clearly we can think, the way that we perform in life, in school, our interactions and communications socially with the people that we know and love and care about. And collectively, community-wise, globally, it all adds up and impacts literally our global and geomagnetic fields. Our thoughts matter, our feelings matter, our students matter, every single one of them, every single educator, every single thought and emotion that you put out has impact. So take care of ourselves, right? Our emotions are so important, and that's one of the saddest things to me about our education system. And one of the things that needs to be transformed most is understanding the importance of our emotional states. We can only think as clearly as the information being sent from our hearts. We can't expect a child to show up and perform academically if they are not feeling safe. It just is not physiologically possible. Our emotional states are first and foremost in terms of their importance for everything, the way that we show up. And Jill, if you think about it, because a lot of my background is with post-secondary education in the technical fields, the career and technical fields, so career and CTE, career technical education. So we focus a lot on the workforce and what the workforce is asking for. And I challenge any of you, I invite you to Google, to search the top 10 workforce skills that companies are looking for right now. Your innovation, your Apples, your companies that are looking for folks to create and innovate. I invite you to look up the top 10 skills that the workforce is looking for right now, and explicitly, expressly, they are 9 out of 10 based in emotional intelligence.
Wow.
The way that we communicate with one another, the way that we work together, the way that we can collaborate, the way that we solve problems together. Are we preparing our students to show up in a world to identify and problem solve together, to collaborate and come up with innovation and solutions to these global problems that we're facing now and that we don't even see in the future? And I would venture to say that we've got a lot of work to do in terms of the transformation from school systems that have largely been based on brain intelligence and academics and have ignored for the large part the intelligence of the heart. It's time to listen to the heart.
Oh, so profound, so deep. I need to ask about, like, this is one place that we're in, listening and really integrating the wisdom and understanding, or not necessarily wisdom until it's practiced, but the intellectual understanding. And yet there are times for all of us where there's just a trigger. It comes maybe out of nowhere. And it happened to me recently, like I could feel my heart, boom, boom, boom. And so what do we do with those triggers in those moments? Like, how do we catch it? Starting with awareness, right? Of course, that's the theme going on. And then, like, what would be a first practice to just like catch a trigger instead of react, to choose to respond?
Beautiful question. And if you remember back on that slide that I showed you of the same person that we measured within the same time frame, we're talking in a matter of minutes, who shifted his heartbeat from a place of incoherence into coherence. And so all of our techniques start with heart-focused breathing. And so to answer your question and to share with our audience here, when triggered, so our tools are to be used, when at any point, and especially in times of high stress, and especially in times that you need them the most. And so what I would offer to you all is that in a moment like that, again, you're aware, and you take the time, even if you're moving, even if you're walking, to put your attention on the area of your heart. You breathe in and out slowly and deeply. And the reason that we do that is because oftentimes when we're nervous, we tend to hold our breath and our breathing becomes very shallow. And this alerts the body. This tells your body that you're okay, that you're safe. This is to move us out of fight, flight, freeze response, and to let your autonomic nervous system, because that's what we're measuring here, to let your autonomic nervous system or your ANS know that you're in charge. And from there, and this takes practice. I wouldn't kid you to say that, this, and that's where the awareness comes in, and that's where the practice comes in. So you're in a moment where that thing happens that triggers you, and you're aware of it. And so you put your attention on the area of your heart, breathe in and out, a little slower and deeper than usual, not meditation, but getting the attention of your autonomic nervous system. That act alone is going to shift the quality of the communication between your heart and brain. Then from there, once you have the calm, alert state, this is not always and necessarily about relaxation. This is being in a state of calm alertness. So your autonomic nervous system is alert, but it's calm and it knows that it's safe and that you're in charge. And from there, you're able to shift your emotional state into one that you prefer. We often start with a state of appreciation. Why? Because when you're in a state of high stress or anger or frustration, it's hard to tell a person, oh, well, just go for that feeling of joy or creativity or happiness. You don't tell someone who's depressed to just feel happy. It's insulting, and it's really, really difficult. But appreciation is an emotion that we can all find something to land on. If you've woken up today, you have something to appreciate. If you have fresh water to drink, you have something to appreciate. If your arms work, your legs work, you get it. So appreciating even the ordinary things in life, what that does is to help shift your perspective on the way that you're thinking about everything, which shifts the quality of the emotional state that you're in. So it shifts you into a place of appreciation, which we know and can measure, sends communication between the heart and the brain that is more coherent. So it's almost like a starting place. Appreciation is something that we start with. So for me, and I really do truly think, in fact, this is my gratitude journal. And while I've spent my life journaling and writing, and I don't have the time to do that kind of writing and journaling anymore, what one practice that I do stay true to till this day is my gratitude practices. And it's not just listing or thinking about, oh, I'm thankful for this. The important thing is that you're feeling the quality of appreciation for whatever thing you choose. It doesn't matter what you choose. In fact, one of the most typical things that we will hear someone say, what did you choose to think about that makes you feel appreciation? Do you know what that one thing is for a lot of people that is just easy to draw upon?
What?
It's their pet.
Hmm.
So if your pet, your dog, your cat, whatever it is, maybe it's being outside in nature, maybe it is the quality of music, maybe it is being at a place that you remember, that you appreciate, that makes you feel a sense of an emotion that is renewing. You're taking yourself back to that place. So literally we say, put your focus on the area of your heart, breathe in and out a little slower and deeper than usual. And then genuinely feel the feeling of appreciation for a person, a place, or a thing. And that's going to be different for everyone, but it shifts your entire autonomic nervous system into a place of more coherence. So it really is mind over matter.
Wow.
And no matter what's happening outside of us, I mean, I worked directly with students who walked through the hallways in the moment of that tragedy at Stoneman Douglas High School a few years ago. No matter how traumatic and tragic the event was, right? Because we know that trauma, the definition of trauma is not an event. It's not the thing that happened. It's how we perceive the thing that happened, or how we are perceiving the world. And what we know is that we perceive the world not as it is. We perceive the world as how we are. We perceive the world through our emotions, our thoughts and our emotions. They become the soundtrack of our lives. And so it's really becoming the orchestra conductor, if you will, of the soundtrack of your life, no matter what's happening outside of you. Now, that doesn't mean that we ignore the issues, and that doesn't mean that we don't get to the work of solving the problems. What it means is that we're getting to the work of solving the problems in a better state, where not only are we able and have access to greater information, we're also able to connect better with those that we work with. And that is measurable. At the HeartMath Institute, nearly every single meeting that we have, every single morning, in fact, when I get off here, I'll start my day with my colleagues at the HeartMath Institute. And every single morning, we start off with a heart lock-in, what we call a heart lock-in. And this is solidifying the connection in our team so that we are in a state of coherence personally, but we also bring ourselves into a state of coherence within our team. We wouldn't do this if we didn't know that it worked. And what that does is allow us to get to solutions easier, allows us to have more compassion for one another, allows us access to greater intelligence than we would have if we were in a state of incoherence and not listening, if you will.
So deep. And I simply want to acknowledge the power of what you had said earlier in terms of how we are feeding ourselves. So you said we don't ignore the issues, but we also recognize that news is often all bad and meant to kind of keep this fear state going. And so how do we interrupt that? And it's through our connecting to our intuition and using this wisdom that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, in no way, because we are actively about agency. I consider myself an activist, but I know that when I come together with colleagues to talk about and brainstorm solutions to problems, I know that if I show up in a state of frustration and anger and judgment and I'm right and you're wrong, well, it only perpetuates the same state. It's all energy. But if we show up collectively in a state of listening heart, if you will, of coherence, in a state where we can literally hear each other better, then it makes it easier for us to come up with solutions together, as opposed to being in this binary polar state where, I mean, we wouldn't have opinions if we didn't think we were right. But this is about the connection that we all have with one another, because it is measurably, undeniably factual. And so if we know that, if you know that as an educator, the way that you show up in your class or at your school impacts your students and vice versa, and students impact one another and we all impact one another, there's a greater sense of responsibility because it's bigger than us. It's not just about how you are thinking and feeling, and self-care is important, absolutely. But this is also about the responsibility to show up as, in my opinion, part of the solution, not creating more of the same problem that is driving the issues in the first place.
Mm. Wow, we are so fortunate to benefit from this wisdom, and we just acknowledge Dr. Childre and Dr. McCready as the founders for this important work, and the team at HeartMath Institute that's perpetuating it, the eloquence of Jenna Moniz as the education specialist to bring it to us in a way that can really land, not just intellectually, but into
Right.
our hearts in a felt sense where we are collectively feeling this global power of coherence if we would only choose it. And how do we learn to choose it? How do we become a movement of educational transformation that truly can integrate the love wisdom. And you just speak it so eloquently. And I love the fact that it's based in science and that it validates it. So it's not something woo woo out there, but it's like the science and practice of coherence. And let's be transformational agents through that power.
That's exactly right. So you understand, I mean, you understand how I could not turn down the opportunity to work with this great body of research and this work of the HeartMath Institute. One of the most challenging things that Dr. Roland McCradius and the team at HeartMath Institute has put so much time and effort into is how do we make what could be complex, complicated, sometimes often lofty, my colleagues would say boring, right? I happen to enjoy it, but not everybody does. Enjoy the science and the nitty gritty of what's happening, you know, within the systems and the research. But to bring this to a place where it is practical, it, you know, it is easy enough to understand. Our tools are super, super simple. The one that we just practiced together, heart-focused breathing, is the foundation of most of our techniques. Because the idea, Jill, is that even if you don't know all of the science behind it, it's happening. And whether or not you know that you're impacting people around you, you are. And so this is becoming intentional about, right, where we place our attention. And so it's just the greatest gift to be a steward of this work, if you will. That the work of the HeartMath Institute is to help awaken the heart of humanity.
Wise words indeed. I'm excited to put my tools to use, the ones that can help me to hear and feel my own heart and relate to it ever more consciously. So I applaud that continuation as recommending to heartmath.org to be able to get your own tools and to explore more about how you can access this important information for self and others. Thank you, Jenna Moniz. I wish you namaste and blessings.
Namaste to you. Thank you.
Thank you.